computer. That'll probably be the easiest way for me to do it. All right, we should be recording.
Hi, this is Xtian, sometimes called Comicsmonger, and I'd like to introduce Johnny Damm to everybody. Hi, Johnny.
Hello, hello.
Folks at the store might recognize I'm a cop. And wait, where'd you go? You there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. You might recognize I am a cop or Riot Comics, which is a little bit newer. We've been carrying I'm a Cop since last year, and a lot of our customers have been really excited about it. Yeah. So, hi, John. Where did you start with this idea? What could you tell us about it that's neat?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say that y'all were the absolute first store to get copies of I'm a Cop. So yeah.
That's nuts.
So yeah, much appreciated. Because I got no, I don't have a distributor or anything like that. So yeah, getting into your store was a thrill.
We try to like have special arrangement stuff where it's basically my discretion of like, I found this on the internet and I'd like to carry it now.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's a good method. How did I start with the project? Well, I'm a cop. I mean, it's made from statements of police union leaders. And it dates back to 2020. I mean, it was, during the I didn't literally start it during the uprising, but I definitely started it sort of in the wake of the uprising, right? Like while still sort of thinking about sort of like what, if there's anything I could kind of contribute, I think, to the conversation, I think might be just the best way to put it. And it occurred to me that, like, in some ways, who we need to hear from on the subject of policing, on the subject of police reform or defunding the police or police abolition was the police themselves. And so I thought, what best represents the voice of U.S. policing? So I started looking at police unions. And for, a couple of years, I followed police unions sort of constantly. Like I followed press conferences. So whenever police unions made statements to the news, I followed various sort of social media accounts and like Twitter accounts by police unions. So I was really looking at public statements that they'd made. And I off and on was making these statements into comics. And sort of my idea was that I would use sort of as the ingredients of the comics is I would use old pre-code, so like, early 50s horror comics that I kind of remake using collage, which is how I primarily work, using a combination of the old horror comics, a little bit of photography. I also, in the finished comic itself, it's also a little bit of a remaking of an old crime comic. I'm a Cop was actually an old crime comic that was made with the collaboration of the NYPD in the 50s. So yeah, so I put that all together. Yeah, and then released it out into the world, and people were really, really interested. So like surprisingly interested.
I mean, it's a really engaging way to do it. Like that classic, abolition idea of like, what do they say they do?
Yeah.
What do they do now? Do we approve of that? Or like, do they even effectively do what you think they do? Like, or do they even say they're going to do what you think they're going to do?
No, I mean, I think that, the police really tell us who they are. And I think it is very, very clear. And it was important to me that, like, this is not like, I don't take anybody out of context. Like, there's nobody I quote in here, because this is like there's maybe like 20 different police union leaders whose words I make into the comics. And I'm not trying to misrepresent what they say. I'm trying to represent what they say in public.
Want to get it right.
Yeah, and that's you know, what they say is super super disturbing. So I feel like that was something that maybe we don't, people actually, even sometimes activists, like it might be the thing that people aren't quite paying enough attention to all the time. There's so much, you know, that we have to pay attention to, but that focus for me on just what the police union said was incredibly useful for me personally. So I thought, you know, that'd be something useful to share.
In Massachusetts, one of the heads of the police unions turned out to be a terrible sexual predator of children.
Yeah.
And a thing I think about a lot is the co-option of the term mutual aid by the police. And that, like, I feel like on a local or interpersonal level, when people are like, you couldn't mean my beloved uncle, like, and like their uncle's like some sort of cop, and he's like, I don't know, I have they ever been called on to do mutual aid and have to like do something that we don't think of at all, or like were they at protests because they were called up through mutual aid? And no one likes to hear that.
No, no, not like, you know, that point, the no one likes to hear that. I mean, I think is part of the trick, right? I mean, it's like, you know, the what does it take to get people to listen? And comics are a surprisingly useful form for that. I mean, it's like it's funny because I often think of educational comics as like, you know, kind of square, like, you know, it's like the you know, and I think there's actually a lot of, I mean, to be clear, like really boring educational comics that are like sort of like visual explainers that aren't doing anything interesting visually. That being said, there's a reason why people make visual explainers and the reason why people tackle hard subjects using comics, because there's something like comics prep us to do complicated work, like because we're always doing complicated work when we're sort of decoding and discovering the patterns of comics pages, but we feel like it's easy for some reason because we're so trained to look at it and to consider it. So that's a perfect sort of way to get in hard ideas, stuff people don't necessarily want to look at. Comics is perfect for that. And probably I will say that sort of personally, I think that's a currently kind of underexploited aspect of comics, but that's kind of another.
It kind of reminds me of I'm very excited about graphic medicine as a genre of comics, and like as a person who's disabled and as a person who grew up with a disabled family and like considers myself in solidarity with other disabled people, like finding the opportunity to like share such subjective in like very personal moments from the outside looking in by the person who the scene's about is like one of my favorite things about comics, like period. Like that whole panning back, but it's your hand doing the panning.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying about like the use of like words and pictures that way is similar to this idea, like we fill in so much of the negative space or the kinetic energy between panels, like to like put movement and like to like feel flow of story. And I know folks who have a really hard time at first reading comics for that reason, because you do have to figure it out and your brain does have to fill in some blanks. And I think that's where like being able to tackle complicated subjects, like you were saying, is so interesting and like has so much potential in sequential art.
Yeah, no, I really agree. It's something I'm definitely really very specifically interested in. I actually teach a comics class, like a history of U.S. comics,
Nice.
San Jose State. And we talk about this a lot with students, like this, you know, I'm you know, teaching sort of my own version of a history of US comics. But, we often talk about sort of step back and talk about the medium. And I actually asked him this thing about like, are comics easier or are comics difficult? And it's really interesting to hear what people say, because it's like I also have a super international student body that I teach. And students who come from kind of all over, and there's a lot of first gen students, and they tend to say, like, off the top of their head, that it's easy. But then it's like when they begin to look really, really hard at a page, then things get a little bit more complicated, right? And that's really interesting. I mean, and the fact that everybody has at least grown up reading, I mean, comic strips. I mean, I'll say that all the 18-year-olds I know still grew up reading Garfield. And Calvin and Hobbes.
Garfield is quite notorious in some circles. I've seen some pretty rare Garfields, let me tell you.
Yeah. Oh. Rare Garfield?
I'm more of a Heathcliff man these days.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah, those Heathcliff comics are fucking bonkers. The idea of like, as you start digging into comics more, the more complicated you realize they are, is something that I've seen a lot happening in discussions of writing alt text and making comics accessible.
Yeah.
And like, I've been really, like, as not a like, I'm not a comics artist. Like, I don't do a lot of the drawing or composition there's to do with drawing comics, but I do, like, work with comics a lot. So one of my favorite things lately is actually asking cartoonists, like, how would you re-adapt this after doing it?
Yeah.
To explain it to somebody who can't see it. Would you do that before you drew it or after? Because like the Marvel method would have you like, oh man, I didn't even think of that. The Marvel method of like, I'll tell you what the story's kind of about, and then the artist draws it, and then you add dialogue later. Like, so bonkers. But like, what if that wasn't part of it? Like for auteur cartoonists, like, how would you now describe what's going on in your panels to someone who can't see them?
That's it's a crazy exercise too, because I try to do that on Twitter, and I'm not good. And actually, most cartoonists, a lot of us, we just don't feel like we're good at this, right? Like it's
really hard. It takes so much practice. I'm not good at it either. I hate and it's hard for me to do it, but it's one of those things. And I like saying it to other people, like, yeah, how many alt texts do you write? I write a bunch of them, like in real life. Like, you ever have to describe everything you're looking at before you put it online? I try to.
Exactly. No, it is but it is. I mean, that's a really interesting connection too. If you think about because it's sort of like retranslating. It's an extra step of retranslating comics. I don't know anything about. I do know that there's a bit of like audiobook adaptations of some comics. That seems like kind of a crazy idea. I just saw that Dykes to Watch Out. There's going to be a Dykes to Watch Out for audiobook, which I guess maybe they just do more as like a performance, I guess. So I guess that kind of avoids probably sort of avoids the issue of really getting into the visuals of it, and just makes it into.
I can send you a link after this to a speech that was given maybe just this weekend, or like a talk just this weekend, that's about adapting zines for screen readers. And like, it's a YouTube link that I'll send you later, because I'm like actively, like, I find it so interesting, because I was also listening to a different talk about this recently, where the audiobook version of it, the audiobook discussion came up as well, and the question of sound effects came out. And the problem of, we don't want to make it too cartoony. Yes, I know what I just said about comics, but it's gonna take them out of it. The more slide whistles anyone hears, like why are there so many slide whistles in this one guy?
But what's interesting about that though is that it does force you to really think about what the comic language is. I mean, there is something like what is comics language? Because it's not just simply words and image. It's, I mean, it's not just, it's like we can break down sort of like what the media, what sort of equals the medium, but then we have all these associations, like the way that sound effects work. And, I mean, I think that it's useful now that people read so much manga in a lot of ways, because we can see that when the traditions in manga are different from the US traditions. And that kind of really reminds us, right, of
Yeah.
that reading comics is both like, it's in terms of, it's the medium, but then it's, certainly cultural associations. And so that idea of like, is the sound effect on the page, is that inherently like cartoony, right? And does that inherently seem unserious when you then try to vocalize it? Like that's wild. That's a really interesting. um it's very informative of how comics work while also getting into some real complications.
It's funny because like I think of like fans of like Spider-Man comics wanting their comics to like look a certain way, and if they get too cartoony or expressive that way, which I think when I'm looking at manga comics, I love that kind of like cartoony
Yeah.
expressiveness, really cementing that I understand the vibe.
Yes.
But in like most like mainstream superhero comics, it's just like bodies in a space, and like you'll find out real quick how good your artist is at facial expressions
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and blocking.
Well,
um
because this is something that I talk about a lot in my class. There's that point where it's like, when undergrounds come out, and then what happens with superhero comics and what happens with sort of independent comics and like what then becomes like alternative comics is like, uh on the indie side, things get super cartoony. Like things get really I mean, actually, cartoony is really the best word for it, because a lot of times they actually look quite a bit like sort of animation traditions and early comics traditions. Where at the same time, what's that guy? The '80s giant can't draw feet. Oh man, Rob
You're referring to Rob Liefeld. He's a good
Rob
friend of the stores,
Liefeld.
and I know what you're talking about.
Yes. So like Rob Liefeld, and then like, Art Spiegelman. It's like we've now like
I
everything.
It took me a long time to get, but I mean, Spiegelman draws them as cartoons. Like Mouse used to hang out with Frank by
Yeah.
Jim Woodring in
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
house advertisement designs. And it took me a long time to really come to an appreciation of the, again, I'm going to say kinetic style of Rob Liefeld's.
Yeah.
And like, it's not always my cup of tea, but like, there's some real cartooning chops there.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's neat. It's funny to see.
No, I mean, I hate it. I mean, I hate that era of superhero comics cartooning. I mean, but I do appreciate that it's deeply stylized and does have real cartooning chops, and they are thinking about it. It's just, for me, what actually sort of behind the thought process seems totally screwed up. Like, because this is the point too where like women's breasts are like out to here, and like, it's like uh um it's
Well,
interesting, but
I mean, it's the same kind of thing as now. Like we're, I mean, for superhero comics news, they've announced during AAPI Heritage Month they're killing Kamala Khan,
yeah,
and in
yeah.
a comic book about Spider-Man. So they should just call it the Fridge, like the Fridge, Kamala
Well,
Khan.
even though that being said, I think if I saw that announcement correctly, G. Willow Wilson and Sana, like the creators of Miss Marvel, are actually writing it. So
I
I
it's really weird.
there's something weird. There's something weird going on there. She's gonna come right back, but it is
Of
like,
course,
it's such a bad idea.
it just feels, and I mean, like I can't ignore that she follows the tradition of Batman, Captain America, Wolverine, Doctor Strange, Thor, Iron Man for being dead in the comics
Yeah.
when their movies come out, like
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
like the month to
Totally.
month comics come out. Those guys are usually dead. You're gonna have some, like at the time one of the Christian Bale movies came out. Batman was a caveman. He was living in caveman times, being written by Grant Morrison. You can't have that. I
No,
love that stuff, but that's not what the people watching the movies want to see.
no, this is an example of where the it strikes me that this is like, I mean, in some ways, like that moment where the Marvel comics and DC comics sort of became research and development for larger intellectual properties. Like that's a moment that like seems like it's really disturbing, but that also was the moment in which Miss Marvel was born. Like it's like this moment where they actually like really got way more ambitious about representation in comics, about bringing in new cartoonists. So it's like so in some ways this weird way in which like comics were given this sort of openness to sort of try things. But the flip side of that is then when the character is really being thought about for intellectual property, really being thought about in terms of the movies and the television show, and then that has to come back to the comic. Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't really love the whole synergy of it. It's fine. I get it. Like I'm not opposed to it. I mean that's why we got the X-Men in black leather for like 10 years.
Yeah,
Um and all of the other superheroes soon afterwards. They were doing what they could.
yeah.
Uh,
They were doing what they could.
but um but I guess like I see it as like a backdrop, and it's been true since like they all went pencils down at the like during the first year of the pandemic, that like they don't really have a lot of titles at Marvel or DC, though DC is working really hard on this right now, I feel like, or at times, it depends on the month, that target the audience that was reading Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't like call up lapsed customers that Miss Marvel was coming back. Let me tell you how. Like she's being killed in another superhero's book.
Yeah,
Like, it's
yeah.
gonna make Spider-Man very upset.
So I have a 9-year-old non-binary child that that is their like total sweet spot of US comics. They read a ton of manga, like more manga than anything else. But of US comics, the that moment where Marvel began pushing
Like Squirrel Girl and
Squirrel Girl, nothing greater. And then the Wasp and Ironheart,
yep.
and all of those. Like those are the comics that for my kid are like the absolute best superhero
And
comic.
they really resonate with our customers too.
Yeah.
DC had similar stuff to that too. No, it was Gwen. It was Gwen, Spider Gwen. When the pandemic hit and pencils down, they finished her book in trade form. You
Yeah.
couldn't get the
Yeah.
last two issues. And like from my perspective, like as a person who sells comics week in and week out on Wednesdays, that's how you would tell their fans that you don't care.
Yeah.
They don't get to complete their series. They had to start over with a number one like 7 times.
It's ridiculous.
And now it doesn't even end. No, you don't even get to say, like, if you bothered to collect all of those and made it through all those volumes, that's what you get. Like, cool. Thanks. I'll be sure to show up next time.
Yeah.
And for me, and I mean, like, when I was growing up, I feel like I had to go through that sort of same thing too. And that's when I found out like Chris Ware and Dan Clowes, like
Yeah.
cartoonists like that, when I was
Yeah.
just like, okay, these, I can't read these anymore right now. What else is there?
Yeah.
And that's when you find out like it's a medium, like that's when you have the like potential to like discover it's so much more than just the sequential soap opera story, like storylines in modern like big two and beyond comics. And like that's why like when I saw what you were doing with these, it really lines up with a thing we've been trying to do with the store, where it's engage our customers more with the values that inform why we do anything. I don't know. I'm not. I'm. I never dreamed of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Um, before this, so uh, as the years have gone on, I've owned the store for like 9 years now. Um, I've become more and more uh, adamant about that, like the things we believe in and the things we like organize for, and the direct actions I like participate in outside of the store have to be part of the store. But like, you also don't want to like run away the like superhero people by being like, oh, I went to Minneapolis recently, back in October. There's this leftist bookstore that like Mayday Comics. It looked really cool. I wouldn't know they were having an action out front, and the front door was locked because nobody could bring you up.
Yeah. 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 Now,
And like, I love that, but that's not how you sell Superman comics.
well, that I mean, but that's also why. I mean, it's I have my comics like now are in a variety of stores, but for me, I mean, I really like. I mean, I like stores like y'all. I mean, particularly now because now that I have a kid too. I mean, because I don't keep up with superhero comics. Like I don't there's I don't keep up with the vast majority of comics. I kind of am looking for very specific stuff. But I go in with my kid and the who has a much broader sort of range of stuff. And so well, I want a comic book store that has kind of everything in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
then also has my books. Do you know what I'm saying? Like also
That's
has
what's up.
my books.
Because we focus only on comics.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't grow up gaming or anything, and I'm rubbish at trying to sell games because like no matter amount of research, I'm not going to be excited about them because I don't play them. So like, oh, is that magic pack full of good cards? No. Maybe you should buy another one. It was full of good cards. Maybe you should buy another one. Like, he's just very insincere. But with comics, like, and being able to focus just on comics, like, it's a it's both easier and more exciting for us because we get to like because I get to do things like this, or we get to like pivot pretty quickly to accommodate like stuff I found on the internet and to try to like organize the store so that like just this past week we did an Eisner nominations thing, and like we would have it's taken us like 8 years to like be together enough to like move and act that way and be like, no, see, we looked at the list and now they're all over here. Other time, like when trans book readathon was happening, trans rights readathon was happening, the day before it started, I was going around making a pile of books on a table that was kind of in off limb, like it was just off the sales floor, and I am positive I noticed and intervened because there were people looking, and it was I was pretty sure they were getting the vibe that like the store doesn't have any books like that because they were all piled on a table out of the way.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but like being able to like incorporate so because that week we wanted to incorporate every that comics are for everyone, and that means we have board books and we have like middle grade, what like early reader, young adult, and comics for adults. We have mature readers comics. No, they're not in the same place in the store. However, everything is in the store that I can see, so don't worry about it. It's my whole thing. Kid, Tits and Clits is funny, but so's Pee Pee Poo Poo, and those are both great comics that came out in the last 2 months. One's the collection of the Tits and Clits underground comics, and Pee Pee Poo Poo by Caroline Flash.
I'm a big fan of both.
Awesome. When I didn't really know, I want to ask more questions about your comic, and then I'll let you go. So Riot Comics, I did not know about a riot in Tompkins Square Park at all. I mean, I would have been 5. There's not a lot I could have done, but but could you tell me like a little more about what went into doing Riot Comics?
Yeah. You know, at the same time I was doing I'm a Cop, I very, very slowly started working on a series of, and I think it was in some ways I was just trying to have something else to work on to kind of balance out my head. That I began studying riots, like really kind of crucial riots. And I think my perspective on riots, I mean, is that they're just studying riots is incredibly informative, like because riots are these, it's this moment where, okay, I'm going to step away from sort of like race riots that were, lynchings, right? Like I don't want to talk about like white people killing people of color, and that long tradition as riots in the way that I'm talking.
Okay, I understand what the
Yeah,
distinction
because
you're
I think
making.
that's important. Because I think in the weaponization of the word riot, I
Yeah,
think that has a long association. I'm talking about, for the most part, when people uprise against the police, right? Like the moments where people just just have enough. I mean, and they are, political protest. They are very much protests. And there's been a couple really interesting books, sort of really talking about how they're also really very successful political protests, right? But so I just had an idea. I'm like, let's look at, in particular, I was looking for sort of smaller, self-contained riots, right? Because it's like I don't need to talk about, there's been a ton of work on, like, the Watts riots, for instance, and the Watts riots, are gigantic and covered lots and lots of days. I was like, how about if I try to focus on, like, much smaller, much more self-contained riots, and see, like I do the research with cops, looking for things that cops said. I was looking for things specifically that riot participants said. Um, and I meant it to be like I wasn't meaning to focus on a single riot. Like I meant it to be like kind of a tapestry. I mean, it's a pretentious word, but of sort of
patchwork.
riots, I guess, through eras that I thought had interesting echoes with each other. But then, I did an extensive piece that I ended up publishing in a magazine called Guernica, that was about the Compton's cafeteria riot, which is a predated Stonewall. It's a really important riot in LGBTQ plus history. And I did that, and then Tompkins, it just kind of found me. I mean, it's funny because it was '88, and so that means that unlike the older riots that I've been writing about, I mean, people who were there are still around, still very.
Yeah.
This is a very pivotal moment for them. I mean, just basically to talk about it. It's a park. It's the Lower East Side, and it was for years. This was an area that was underfunded. It's a low income, definitely sort of a low income community. The NYPD pushed unhoused people into that neighborhood. Like, so there was a really large unhoused community centered in the park. It also was a central scene for the squatter movement, for the anarchist squatters. It also was a central sort of location for the music scene, like the hardcore punk, and sort of like industrial.
Oh, yeah. I actually knew that. Yeah.
And that's all centered around this park and this neighborhood. And what I don't really say in the comic is it really was Mayor Koch at the time that really decided. I mean, it was the push of gentrification. And
Yeah.
so they did this. It all starts where they decide they're going to do a curfew on this park, and the curfew means that this gives them an excuse to kick out long established unhoused encampments, and it also strips away this sort of community hub. So there was protests against it, and the and there was one protest first, and then the next week they followed up with another protest, which is commonly known as the Tompkins Square Park riot. And in both cases, the cops just attacked the shit out of people. Like, I mean, it was like, I mean, the cops, they were covering up their badges. They showed up without badges. I mean, it just like, it was very, very clear. And I think it's been crucial to a lot of people's activism because it was so visible, for one. I mean, like, you know, there's a ton of people there. I mean, like, this is a you know, kind of an iconic neighborhood. And so, you know, for people who live more sheltered lives, right? The white people who live more sheltered lives, I think this was a lot of people's first experience of seeing this degree of police violence. But the other part of it is that the actual rioting crossed so many really interesting lines, sort of unusually, because, you know, I mean, there were grad students there. This was the unhoused community. There were anarchists. I mean, it was like it was really multiracial. So the more and more I got dug into it, I just got fascinated with it, and I ended up sort of still not meaning to make a whole comic about it, but I kept making comics pages about it, and then I was like, oh shit, I've got like this, I've got too much. Like, let's figure out how to make this thing. That was a long
Looks like I already am doing it.
Exactly. I think that's often with work. It's like, you know, I have these projects, like I think on the level of project, but I don't think on the level of what the actual thing the project is going to turn into. And at some point, I'm just like, oh wait, I'm already making this particular comic book, so it's got to be good.
I know that feeling where it feels like it. Like I'm so wary of saying like things like a line, like these aren't stars. I put them there. I just didn't think about where they were in relation to one another. And yes, they're now the plates are spinning. I don't need to tell you how I got them spinning. I don't even know why they're on those sticks. I love the stickers too. We keep losing them, but I have them again. But we promise. This happened with health communism as well when we carried that last year. We got stickers from them, and every time someone came in, I was like, stop bringing it up. But no, we just found them again today. And which was good. I was getting everything together, and you included a bunch more in the recent package. Did you? I think you told me that like some professors have started using your book in other schools.
Yeah. No, there's two in the last semester. There was two different professors who contacted me who were teaching from including including a really great comic scholar who bought I'm a Cop at Your Store. And
cool.
Guy named Charles Hatfield, who also included me in his list of the best comics in 2022. So that was like,
that's rad.
Yeah. So now there's in the comics journal. So yeah, that was
oh yeah, and I read that. Yeah, I read that. That was really great. That was a really interesting. Yeah. That was good.
So
I'll try to remember to put that in the link, like comments or like post for this.
Yes. Yeah. So that's, I mean, then that's wild. That's something I would not have not something I would have thought that people are teaching it specifically, and in both cases they're in comics classes. So
yeah. I mean, it does make sense to me. Like you're people looking for like expressionist like representation using the graphic form, but it's not like having them read a very special issue of the X-Men.
Yeah.
You know, like it's being able to show like how these things align, and like it's funny the cross section of customers who like are very interested at first, and I have to figure out if I'm going to explain the idea behind the comics or if I'm just gonna let them have a good time.
You certainly don't need to. I mean, I do think it's kind of crucial. It's like I don't say, for instance, that like I'm a cop. Like I don't need to say like this is an abolitionist comic. right?
Oh
Because
no.
like that's not, even though I'm an abolitionist, and so it's like and certainly abolitionist circles find that comic of use, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like because it's a handy, or I mean, hopefully they find it because it's a kind of a handy, like, here's here's the police, it's like when you need like a little publication that's going to talk about the toxicity of police culture. It has that,
Yeah.
but it's like I don't need to like give it to give it sort of a political agenda. I mean, the biggest criticism I got online, the funniest criticism I got it online, was people that were like, "Yeah, this is just what the cops say, loser." This is just what they said, and I'm like, "Yes, this is just what they said." Like, listen
That's
to
like a delicious moment on the internet.
they're like, yeah, they're like, "Gotcha, you just quoted them." I'm like, "Yes, thank you for getting that," while at the same time hating. So
That's really funny. Like that's a tactic, though. Like that's specific. Like yes, I know, and it's making like look at the way you're reacting to it. No, that's not. Yeah, that's a delicious moment on the internet. Like,
it's a very funny moment. I will say the other, just because this occurred to me, that the more serious criticism, the actually serious criticism that I get in reviews, or like by serious I mean like they mean it, right? Like it's like not disingenuous and not trolling. Is people suggest that the my comics may not have reach, right? That there's like something like I'm a Cop may not have reach, like that because because I mean maybe like just standard comics fans aren't gonna buy it. There's an interesting sort of discussion about it that I push back on that a little bit because I'm like, you know what? Like this comic, like a lot of people discovered this comic. Like I'm like a super obscure cartoonist. And this was something that people discovered, and I, hand sold from my house 2,000 copies of this comic. I mean, and like, that I packaged out without distribution. And that says something about what people are sort of willing to, I don't know, encounter or give. And that it's, I mean, and that people's attitudes towards comics aren't as closed as we think. And I hope that's what you're sort of seeing in your shop, that it's like, that
you've seen where we stock it. We stock it with just the other comics that come in. We don't put it in the like very political section. Oh, there's Christian books over there. Yeah. Some of them aren't even comics.
Yeah.
But no, we put them in really innocuous spots, and it is interesting to see who like take what they take from it and who's interested. And like it's not it's not like only sold at abolitionist book night. And like that's what's so interesting. Like I've reordered I'm a Cop from you like a couple of times now.
Yeah.
And like I know it's not like enormous numbers, but like when I run out of it, I need it again because I know people would want to buy it.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice to hear, particularly because I'm gonna have to do another print run on I'm a Cop soon, and
that's rad.
Third, yeah.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, but it'll be but there is kind of this question now that it's been out for as long as it's out, like what should the print run be? But and if it, if it's I guess the other question about the print run has to do with sort of periods of time because it's specifically covered from 2020 to 2022. It's like by 2025, are people going to look back at that and they'll be like, that was a different world?
Yeah, right. Quaint.
Yes, I'm guessing they will. Time moves very, very fast and sometimes very slow.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see, won't we? Yeah. I think this is a good point to wind it down. This has been a wonderful chat, Johnny. I'm really glad I got to meet you and talk to you and introduce your books to everybody at the store who might watch this.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the support, and y'all should go buy comics from Comics and More.
He's right.
All right.